Yep, I love that quote. Yeah, the quote was, "We buy things we do not like to impress people." Or sorry, I said that wrong. We buy things we do not want to impress people we do not like. One of the things about this discipline that was different, if you picked up on it, was the dynamic of the fact that this is kind of both an inward and outward discipline. So, and he kind of talked about the balance of that, that like if it's just inward, then it's the kind of the authenticity of it is questioned. Because if we're being transformed inwardly, it should show in the way we live. But then he also said, like, if it's just outward, it's just legalism. Like there's a thread of this that like, and that's what we're going to kind of dig into a little bit tonight, is that, man, you can't. This is something you can't just do outwardly. Maybe like some of the others that we'll talk about in this next section now, but um, I know people who do a lot of like you know that list of 10 things at the end of the chapter, the 10 things that he said, I don't remember, what did he call those 10 things. He called them the controlling principles of outward simplicity. Those 10 principles, I know people who do those, and it has nothing to do with God, just for moral reasons. And it's like, man, um, there's a difference. I'll say this, like, and obviously I had read this several years ago. I have read it since I've been here, and then doing this again for the class, reading this chapter again. Um, Something else that just, it was a good refresher, something that I was really kind of thoughtfully digging into as I was reading, was just this idea that like how much our anxiety is affected by this, and the fact that Jesus even addressed that like, man, this is kind of, in a lot of people's lives, the root of their anxiety starts here. Okay, well, let's start in on the handout then. Um, that verse at the top comes out of the Sermon on the Mount, and that is going to be, if you looked at the end of the worksheet on the back, we're going to look at that text together, the whole thing, Matthew chapter 6 toward the end. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. The central point, for the discipline of simplicity is to seek the kingdom of God, uh, seek the kingdom of God and the righteousness of his kingdom. And then everything necessary will come into its proper order. That's what Jesus, those are the words of Jesus, that, man, if we seek first his kingdom and we seek first his righteousness, all these things will fall into place. All these things will be added. And Foster says, well, that's the central point of this entire discipline of simplicity. And do you remember why he says that? You remember how he develops that early on in the chapter? Has anybody seen the movie City Slickers? Did you ever see that movie? The '90s movie, Billy Crystal. Um, there it makes me think of that movie a little bit. And when I say that, it's because the in the movie, Mitch Robinson or Robbins, Billy Crystal's character, um, he goes out kind of, I mean, you could say on a quest, kind of having a midlife crisis, and he goes as an urbanite. He goes in hopes of finding a cure, um, and he takes two friends. They go and they're on a 2 week cattle drive, and they go on this cattle drive, and um, they know nothing about riding, they know nothing about roping, they know nothing about wrangling. And then, do you remember the character's name that they kind of come under the guidance of? Anybody that's seen the movie, you remember? No, his name is Curly. And like Curly is this older man who knows all this stuff, and he's kind of their guide, or he's their trail hand. And there's this scene in the movie where Curly tells Mitch something to this effect. He said, "You city folks are all alike. You spend a lifetime getting tied up in knots and think that spending a couple of weeks out here will straighten you out. But you won't be fixed that way. What's important," he said, "is that you find the one thing. Find the one thing." And when Mitch realizes that Curly hasn't told him what the one thing is, he goes after him. He wants to know, well, what's the one thing? And Curly never provides the answer. It's up to Mitch to find his own one thing. And that's kind of how the movie goes. But Foster in the chapter in the first part of this, he kind of lays out that it's like, man, um, but he's a little bit more accommodating, right? Because he tells us what the one thing is. He doesn't kind of leave us hanging with that, but he says that the life healing benefits of simplicity will untie our knots. And he unpacks the secret. He says simplicity is achieved by doing one thing. One thing. The one thing is seek first the kingdom. Seek first the kingdom of God. Everything hinges. Was his quote in the chapter. He said, "Everything hinges upon maintaining the first thing as first. Nothing must come before the kingdom of God, including the desire for a simple lifestyle." So even there, he says, like, this discipline shouldn't even set out to do it to have a simple lifestyle. The intention should be, you're setting out to do this to make the kingdom number one, to make the kingdom of God your one thing. Seek first the kingdom. And I'm not sure that, like some of the other disciplines, that we would necessarily approach it that way. We would see the value in a lot of the things that he suggests and a lot of the ways that he suggests this plays out. But I loved how he started the chapter. And it's that next thing on your sheet: simplicity is freedom. This is first statement. Simplicity is freedom, duplicity is bondage. And so here's the interesting thing. I was trying to, and thinking about this tonight, and for our conversation and the purposes of this, like, what exactly is is simplicity setting us free from? And there's three things, I think. There's three things that and I think these things, like, they've been interchangeable throughout generations, uh, over centuries of time. But I think they are as important in our culture today. They have just as much, like, stronghold over us as they've had uh, over different generations and different people groups involving different things, but simplicity frees us from the bondage of self, things, and people. Simplicity sets us free from the bondage of self, things, and people. And so I just kind of put some questions there with each one of those things so that you could kind of see where I was going with that, so that we could maybe help unpack that a little bit in our minds, because here in a few minutes I'm going to have you talk about it at your table. But in confronting our bondage with self, I just put some questions there that I think would be helpful. And this is how I think simplicity frees us from that. Am I pretending to be an expert in any area where I'm only an amateur? Is there anywhere that I do that? Do I really read the books I quote? And he even, I think, hinted at that at one point in the chapter. Do I use rhetoric as a curtain to conceal my true identity? And so to play that one out, just so you understand, because maybe we don't use the word rhetoric very often, but do I talk in genuine of who I am to impress people? Do I use words to impress, or do I talk a certain way? Or do I talk, maybe you've seen this before, but do I talk differently with different groups of people so that they'll like me? Do I give the impression of being more godly or more profane, whichever helps my status with the group I'm with? Or do I try to impress people with a degree or with a title or with honors? I think those are really important questions that kind of get at this bondage we live in. How this anxiety of duplicity starts to play out when we're in bondage to ourselves. And then that next group of questions, confronting the bondage of things. And this one, man, these I think could be some tough questions to answer honestly. Am I living contentedly with my income? Does anybody want to take a shot at defining content? What does it mean to be content? Satisfied. I like that. So you might ask it out, am I satisfied with my income? Do we live as a family, do we live as if we're satisfied with our income? Do I act my age? I went through these questions with some of the staff today, and that question made a couple of our staff members go, "Why is that question? What does that mean?" And have you ever known anybody that went through a midlife crisis, where it's just like,